The Chris Stigall Show. The Chris Stigall Show.
5:30 to 9 on Talk Radio 1210.
WPHT.
Many Senate Republicans seem afraid to even engage in this debate. Shame on them. On issue after issue, Republicans have called for return to so-called regular order. They come out here on the Senate floor. Let's return to regular order. They ask for an opportunity to offer amendments. They've called for free and open debate here in the Senate. And those who have been yelling the most for this free and open debate are the people who sent me a letter saying, we're going to filibuster everything that relates to guns. Talk about speaking out of both sides of the mouth. This is the poster child of that.
When did it become conventional wisdom? Filibusters are not debates anyway. That's what I don't understand, and I'm hearing that from everybody, that somehow the filibuster is not welcome debate. Look who's in studio. This is a real pleasure. The guy that has made the filibuster hip again, Rand Paul, senator from Kentucky. Good to see you, sir.
Hey, good morning. Glad to be with you.
You made tons of news, as you well know, on this filibuster, which I think procedurally would be different than what we're talking about perhaps this week. But what of that? What do you make of that? What got everybody so juiced and ginned up about it the last time? Before we get into this week in guns, let's talk about that last one. Go back there a little bit.
Well, you heard the Bill of Rights is sexy. You know, people on all sides of the aisle, like left and right, in the middle, people think it's kind of important. And the way I try to frame it is look, I have a lot of young soldiers from my state who've been fighting in wars for 10 years, and they believe they've gone to fight for protecting our Bill of Rights. And I thought it was a little soon to give up on the Bill of Rights, basically that you would not get a trial if you were accused of a crime. That's what this was about. The president was claiming an authority or unwilling to deny that he had an authority to be judge, jury, and executioner of Americans on American soil. And I kept saying, it's an easy question. It should be an easy no. And finally, we pried a no out of him, but it took 6 weeks and 13 hours of filibuster to get it out of him.
I won't ask you to name names or get specific with me, but what is it about some of your Republican colleagues that have such a hard time standing with you on basic questions of is it constitutional or not? As it applies to anything, it seems like it's not as black and white for some of your colleagues as it ought to be.
Well, I think they seem to be without moorings, or they seem to go in the direction that the wind is blowing. And for a lot of things, these are, like when I ask Kerry in the hearings about going to war, and he says, oh, you seem to be an absolutist on going to war. And I said, well, the Constitution was pretty specific. It's Congress that declares war, and you don't get to make this decision as a president. And he said, well, I would obey the Constitution except for when it's inconvenient, when it's hard to get things through. It's hard to pass things in Congress. Precisely. That's what our founding fathers wanted, is a lot of debate, a lot of deliberation, not to make it easy to go in one direction, particularly if that direction was away from freedom and towards more governmental power.
So we've gotten into a place, haven't we, then, that even some of your colleagues think unless we're doing something, unless government's creating and churning out something, a piece of legislation, that's bad. And I would take the view, and I think you do too, a restrained government, less government's great, but certainly a slow restrained government that's thoughtful and deliberative before acting is better.
Yeah, and that's what's going on right now with the gun debate. There's a lot of debate going on. We've been debating this for months now, and I think there's still some important questions. And I've asked the president if he wants to come and talk to me. Come and talk to me. My door's open. But come and tell me how any of your proposals would have prevented Sandy Hook. I mean, I have a great deal of sympathy for those families. I have 3 boys. You and I were just talking. You have a young family. You know, for any of your kids to be killed in school or to be killed anywhere in a public place is just beyond comprehension. I don't know if I could ever get over that. I mean, it's just something that a tragedy. But to politicize their tragedy and turn it into this debate over guns, which really, unfortunately, none of the things they're proposing would have saved any lives.
So his suggestion yesterday, he goes to Connecticut and basically suggests that any proposed filibuster, and let's talk about that now. Strategically, what is that? It's being called or branded as theatrics of common, and it's standing in the way of his good common sense that everyone can agree on, and you're just being a theatrical lunatic.
Well, you know, he also paraded a bunch of policemen up there and said that they were going to lose their salaries if the sequester went through, but he failed to tell anybody that the policemen are paid with your local taxes, not with your federal taxes. But, you know, I think that sometimes the Second Amendment doesn't get the same respect as the First Amendment. And I think different sort of crowds seem to defend one versus the other. But I think people are looking for someone who defends all of the Bill of Rights. And so, for example, I ask people who think, well, why don't we just universally register everybody that'll make things better? We'll have a data bank of who the bad people are. And my response to them would be, you know what? Bad ideas have probably killed more people than anything else. Why don't we have a registry of those who go to church, those who are godless and without religion, and then why don't we say, oh, well, let's find those people who aren't going to church. Do you think there'd be some objection to a registry of those who go to church and those who are not going? Let's find them and get them to church because that might prevent violence in our society. Of course there'd be objection. I would be among those. But it's the same thing, First Amendment or Second Amendment, taking away your privacy, taking away your freedom through restrictions.
I have a friend that is convinced. I don't necessarily disagree with him, but he wanted me to ask you this. He said, is the 10th Amendment, in your view, the key? You said Bill of Rights is sexy again. Is it the 10th Amendment? Can you throw that in there as the key to maybe starting to open up the eyes of a lot of Americans that maybe aren't engaged? Is it that you have simplified the message and say, this is what our founding documents say? Does it meet that standard or not? It's that easy? Is it just about getting it down to brass tacks?
Yeah, not only is it that the powers not mentioned in the Constitution are given to the federal government or left to the people, I also like the part where it says they're not to be disparaged.
Yeah.
And so these rights are left to the people. But the other reason why this is going to be a continuing and ongoing battle and discussion is because we're out of money. And the state governments don't have printing presses. The federal government does. But the federal government likes to mandate to state governments things they have to spend money on, Medicaid, Obamacare. And what's going to happen? There's going to be one more big grand battle on Obamacare. When the bills come due and state governments have to pay for these, that's when you're going to see state governments standing up and saying, yes, the 9th and 10th Amendments say these are our rights, these are our powers, these are left to the states and people, and we're going to stand up to any kind of bully federal government. And I think that's a fight that you're still going to see.
Is that I'm particularly fascinated with the following that your dad had among young people, and I think it's transposed now to you a bit. Maybe not as much. I don't know, maybe as much. But it's notable, and I think it's important. What is it your dad did? What is it you do that seems to have, and it's called libertarianism. If that's appropriate, I don't know, but is that a brand that kids can gravitate to, and is that what you're trying to inject in the Republican Party to try to grow the youth?
Well, you just had Grover Norquist on, and he's always talked about the Leave Me Alone coalition. And I think that Leave Me Alone coalition, the kids fit neatly into that. When I go to Howard University this week, when I talk to them, I'm not going to go and say I know what's best for them or that I somehow am cool because I know some youthful music and that way I fit in with the youth of today.
Yeah.
It's really it is about ideas, but it's about letting people determine their own futures and have their own freedom to determine which way their life goes. And so I think a small government lets people have different decisions and make different decisions on the way they want to lead their lives.
Is that the Republican Party or is that libertarianism? What is that? Do you define it?
I think our family, we were always big Reagan fans, but, one of the things Reagan says, the very heart and soul of conservatism is libertarianism. To me, it means that freedom is expansive and government should be limited. And, Patrick Henry talked about we have government instituted not to restrain the people, but the Constitution was instituted to restrain the government and keep its size limited. But freedom, and in fact, I like when people talk about that the powers given to government are enumerated, the freedoms left are unenumerated. They're infinite. All the freedoms left, private property is not mentioned in the Constitution, but obviously we all believe that our freedom to own private property and control our property is something that's fundamental to our country.
Are you then able to say, I don't need here's, for instance, the gay marriage debate before the Supreme Court. It was very easy for me to say it doesn't matter my position or your position on it. It's a state matter. That 10th Amendment issue. Isn't it easier to just say, look, we're not here to tell you what to do with your lives. The Constitution doesn't have anything to say about it. You guys are on your own in your communities and your states. Have at it.
There is no easy answer to all this, but what I would say is that marriage has always been a state issue. We are a country torn and changing our opinion on the ideas of this. I still am a traditionalist. I think there's not only a great sort of moral underpinning to society, but I think a great economic underpinning to having man, wife, children, and in that order, not having children before you have the man and wife, because really, if you look at poverty in our country, number one cause of poverty or relationship to poverty is having kids before you're married. So I think the family unit is an important thing. I'm not really ready to give up on the tradition of that. I see the only in-between solution, though, to going forward is letting states decide on this. In Kentucky, we've decided for traditional marriage. In New York, they've decided the opposite. I think a way to have some federalism is that we sort of accept that different parts of the country have different opinions on this, and then we do try to move forward.
So let's pretend it's Rand Paul, nominee for President of the United States for the Republicans in 2016, and the staunchly socially conservative members of the party have a problem with that answer. What do you do? This is something that plagues me a lot. I don't understand what you do here.
Well, the thing is I come from the socially conservative wing of the party. I am a social conservative, but I'm also someone who understands that the law sometimes is unable to enact that, or that the law sometimes will enable states to make different decisions on this. I also do believe that if you federalize all of these issues, that the mood of the country and the direction of the country is to establish things that we don't agree in. So I think if we make marriage a federal issue, we're going to have federal laws that say same-sex marriage is fine, whereas I'd rather the federal law be silent on issues of marriage, stay out of marriage as far as the tax code, federal benefits, all of that, make it neutral, and that way people like myself who believe in traditional marriage still can, and we don't have to have a government promoting something we don't believe in. Now, it's a little bit harder at the state level because states are still involved in this, but I think it's the only way forward, really, is to let the states handle the issue.
Brief amount of time we have left. I'll ask you quickly on the bill, the Gang of Eight. They're talking about Rubio leading this discussion on immigration reform. I think I hear that you're supportive of it, and I wonder for people that are that have a lot of misgivings out there, particularly on our side, where they think, well, this is just 86 all over again, and how can we trust it? You'd say what?
What I would say is in 86, they promised us they would secure the border, and it never happened. What I'm going to introduce is an amendment called Trust But Verify that says the progress of immigration reform only goes forward if Congress votes each year on whether or not the border is secure. So we have an amendment that says you have to do X, Y, and Z. The border has to be secured. We're going to have reports from the governor, and then it's going to come back, and Congress will vote on it. Because I'm for normalizing and giving work visas to those who want to work in our country, but I'm not for an open border. Milton Friedman always said, if you have an open border in a welfare state, you got real problems. We've got a welfare state, and if we have an open border, all of Mexico may move up here. So my point is, let's have some compassion. Let's figure out how to normalize people. They're here. They're not going home. We have de facto amnesty now. Let's figure out how to get them work visas. Let's don't make a special pathway to voting, but let's get them work visas, and then let's try to move forward with it. But let's, I think you have to secure the border first.
Do you this talk of a filibuster, is this coming? Is this legit? Is it just bluster? Is it what's going to happen?
The interesting thing about the people who don't want to filibuster on the gun rights issues, I think they're hypocrites, because if it were the First Amendment, they'd be the first ones standing up to filibuster registration of church membership.
Yeah.
And I'd be there with them also. But the thing is that so far in the last 2 years that I've been up here, Harry Reid has filibustered almost every bill. People don't realize this. The Democrats, Republicans are filibustering it. He limits debate, and he limits the amendments that can be introduced. They have to be personally approved by Harry Reid. The vast majority of the time, there are no amendments from Republicans. That's the way it is up here. So those Republicans who capitulate and say, oh, we want to get on the bill so we can have debate, they're going to get on the debate, and then Harry Reid is going to be the dictator of Washington again, and he's going to decide what amendments go on the gun bill. It's a huge mistake. None of the proposals would have saved any lives at Sandy Hook.
So procedurally, just so we're clear, what's coming? If it's a filibuster, what has to happen?
Typically with filibuster, it doesn't do anything other than that it you have to have 60 votes to pass the legislation. Even if you stand up like I did for 13 hours, I couldn't stop the nomination of John Brennan. I could simply delay it for 13 hours until, for various reasons, I had to stop. Yeah. But you can't stop the legislation permanently. So it really doesn't stop debate. All it does is procedurally make it a little more difficult. And I think when you're protecting the Bill of Rights, it should be extremely difficult for the other side to win a battle.
That's gonna this is happening. This is gonna come.
It's going to happen
Tomorrow.
I don't control the schedule. That'll be up to Harry Reid, but it could happen as early as this week. He also, though, the new rules changes in the last couple of months allow him to go around us. He may go completely around the filibuster and just introduce it and get it done with limited amendments that he controls, and that would be a real tragedy to try to abridge the Second Amendment without an amendment process.
The Chris Stigall Show.
5:30 to 9 on Talk Radio 1210.
WPHT.